Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today's webinar, From Tech Debt to Trusted Automation, a smarter, safer firewall management. My name is Taylor Dawson. I'm a senior solutions consultant here at Network to Code, and I'll be your MC for today's session. We've got an exciting lineup of content and some seriously sharp folks ready to show you how Nautobot and IP Fabric can transform how your teams manage firewall rules with less friction and a whole lot more automation. So sit back, grab that second coffee, and let's get into it. We'll go to the next slide. Joining me today are two fantastic individuals you'll hear from shortly. First, we have my colleague Federico, who's also a solutions engineer at Network to Code, and someone who lives and breathes automation day in and day out. And representing IP Fabric, we've got Darren, field CTO and longtime advocate for getting things done smarter across the network. Each of us will bring different pieces of the story today, from platform synergy to deep dive demonstrations. So let's get started. What we're going to cover today is a quick intro to who Network to Code and IP Fabric are, how we're going to be better together in providing this solution, and we'll break down the firewall provisioning process specifically. So we're going to start where most teams are today, and then we can think where you can go tomorrow. You'll get a look at Nautobot's application ecosystem and a few apps, specifically the application dictionary and the firewall app, and a demonstration of how both of these work. And of course, how this pairs well with IP Fabric's solution and a demonstration of that technology as well. Of course, we'll wrap up some time for some Q&A at the end. But before we get into it, a couple of housekeeping items I wanted to address. Do not forget to use that reaction button down at the bottom. We'd love to see what everyone is finding interesting and you're excited about to hear throughout today's webinar. So please hit those reactions and be interactive throughout today's session. And then we always encourage you to ask questions. So please use the Q&A section down at the bottom to submit any questions, as the chat has been disabled for this webinar. Myself, Federico, and Darren will be happy to answer these questions throughout the webinar, as well as at the end when we have that dedicated time for questions and answers. So let's talk about who Network to Code and IP Fabric are and why we're better together. To start, if you are new to us at Network to Code, here's the TLDR. We help enterprise network teams reduce manual work, increase reliability, and scale with confidence through automation specifically. Our mission's quite simple. We want to build a world where every network is fully automated. To do that, we offer a full stack of services, from strategic and advisory services, professional services, all the way to manage and support services. And of course, with those services, we have our platform of choice, Nautobot, the open source automation platform purpose-built for networking. And to talk a little bit more about IP Fabric, I'm going to hand the mic over to Darren so he can introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks for that, Taylor. So for IP Fabric really was born out of a need to fill the gaps that are left by conventional processes in network operations. It's about managing the understanding of our real networks. That's ones with lots of different vendors, lots of different technologies, old and new, in the cloud, on-prem, how they all work together to deliver applications. more often than not, that's been left to the individual to work out for themselves, to make sure that documentation is up to date and accurately reflects the state of the network the last time it was touched. And that, of course, leads to gaps in coverage, inaccuracy, and multiple desperately out of date references. So, what IP Fabric does to solve that is automatically discovers the whole network end to end, models it as data, but then goes a whole load further by using that model to verify that it's behaving the way you expect it to.
All right, so let's talk about why network to code and IP fabric are such a strong match. At network to code, we are all about enabling intent-based automation. That's making sure the network behaves the way the business expects it to. But to do that, we're going to need a reliable real-time insight into the network's actual state. And that's exactly where IP Fabric comes in. They give us that assurance layer, visibility, validation, and verification across our network, just like Darren described. And when you combine a source of truth with IP Fabric's dynamic insights, you get a feedback loop that enables safe and scalable automation. And to break that down, Darren, let me hand it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Taylor. From the IP Fabric side, our goal is very simple. What we're doing is providing that deep visibility and end-to-end insurance to validate that that network matches the intent that you just described. So whether you're troubleshooting or validating a change, whether you're preparing to push a firewall rule, we make it easy to understand the real-time state of your network and the behavior that results from it. And Autobot, of course, is going to bring the context to that, the application definitions, the ownership, the business logic. So when you bring those two platforms together, you not only see what's going on, but you can take confident action and fast. So instead of guesswork, you've got the ability to make data-driven decisions to drive that automation. Now, of course, we've been working together for some time now, not just coming up with the theory, but really developing the practice, the real use cases for automation for our customers, ranging from ensuring that the single source of truth is synchronized with the network state and providing access to rich network data through chatbots, to validating change across the whole network, like we'll see in today's use case. And of course, there are plenty more of those in the pipeline, but we'll come to that later.
Fantastic. So together, we are shifting from a reactive operations to proactive automation. And it's not just about scripting tasks, it's about building a trusted, closed loop system that continuously learns, always verifies, and constantly adapts with our ever-changing network. And that's the foundation we're setting today, and the reason this partnership just makes sense. So let's dive into it.
Yeah, let's start a little by digging deeper into what IP Fabric does and how that's valuable in modern network operations, particularly in the automation context. So we've just got a quick overview of IP Fabric as a platform. What we're doing is we're gathering data directly from network nodes using CLI or API, and that will be inventory data, configuration, state policy. But then the clever piece is where we analyze it to build topology and a model of the understanding of that interconnectedness, whether you're talking on-prem infrastructure or cloud. The analytics layer runs a rule over that model, and using our own experience and knowledge and external data sets, we've developed dozens of standard checks that you automatically run as part of our discovery process. Now, the results of that can be consumed directly by users in our UI, or through our extensive API, we integrate with all manner of operational tooling to give access to that intelligence to whoever needs it. And this is really the focus of our work with Network to Code. A great early example was the Autobot chatbot, which allowed you to pull data directly from our API and present it into Slack or other chat platforms. But we'll see more examples of that as we go today. To give you an idea of what that allows you to do, we've got an example here where because we don't just have the data, but we have an understanding of the network, we can do lookups against our data model like this. This is a path that's shown up between two hosts, passing through switches, routers, firewalls, and whatever else stands in the way. There's equal cost paths here and all kinds of things, and a variety of network node types. Because IP Fabric understands how these things work, we're able to trace this, effectively do a packet walk through our data model. Now you'll notice there are two red boxes here in the middle of this. These are firewalls, and these firewalls, while we're able to have a path from one into the other, these firewalls are actually going to stop the traffic in question, because the firewall policy that's defined on them basically is going to block that traffic. So what we need to be able to do is make a change, and that change is going to change the behavior of those firewalls. So we make a change, we run another snapshot in IP Fabric, and what we then get from the same path lookup is what we see at the bottom here. Those firewalls that were red have now turned green, and that green represents the fact that the new firewall policy has been evaluated and is allowing that traffic to pass. Now, we're seeing that as a lovely drawing here, but of course, equally, we're able to pull that same data through API. And that capability is the key to our next, as we develop the use case, we're going to see this in action. I'll hand over to Federico now so he can introduce Nautobot.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Taylor. So alongside IP Fabric, Nautobot is the other key component of this solution. So let's have a brief overview of that. So for those that are unfamiliar with Nautobot, it is an open source product developed and sponsored by Network2Code. Nautobot serves as a dual purpose. It functions both as a network source of truth as an automation engine. With its opinionated data model, it allows you to define the intended state of your infrastructure through its source of truth component. Additionally, thanks to a rich ecosystem of application extensions, Nautobot can perform automated tasks such as configuration compliance, circuit maintenance, just to mention a few, and as we will see today, firewall rule provisioning. Nautobot is available in two forms, self-managed as well as SaaS application. So based on what we discussed so far, if we look at the network automation diagram, we can see that Nautobot and IP Fabric sit at the core layer of the architecture, covering the most critical aspect of infrastructure automation. So let's dive into today's topic. So to better appreciate the benefits brought by our solution, let's review first today workflow and roles for a typical firewall rule request. So we have two main personas, the requester or the product owner, whose sole role and responsibilities to raise firewall rule requests, and the engineer, who is responsible for implementing change requests, maintaining up-to-date firewall configuration, and managing all related configuration data such as IPAM. The engineer is also ultimately accountable for security audits. Let's explore each step of today's workflow. So the product owner needs connectivity between two applications. Still, the PO pulls data related to those applications from one or more source of records, such as a CSV file or IPAM. Then he or she raises a firewall request via an ITSM platform. Based on the information provided in the ticket, the engineer performs path discovery to identify the potential firewalls between the two applications. Due to vendor-specific syntax or OS version differences in the discovery firewall, the engineer may need to write different type of configuration. The configuration are then pushed to the devices, and afterward they are verified. Once the configuration is verified, the ticket is updated. This step is one of the main pain points in the workflow, as issues frequently arise, such as misconfiguration, outdated IPs due to unreliable source of records, or incorrect firewalls being identified. Lastly, as most important, as you can see, there is no automation involved in any of the steps outlined so far. Let's now see how we envision what we call next-gen firewall rule automation. So the first step is to rebalance responsibility between the two personas. So to achieve this, we need to abstract the definition of an application away from IP addresses and instead use a human-readable string representation of the application. The best way to understand this is by thinking about FQDN. For example, when you type google.com, you don't know or need to know which IP address is behind it. You just know that google.com is the search engine you are looking for. If we define a set of applications and assign each of them to a specific product owner, that product owner can then raise and manage firewall requests based on the application that he or she is responsible for, without needing to worry about low-level network details such as IP addresses. The network engineer, on the other hand, has the knowledge of the business logic and the security requirements for each application. This allows them to enforce those requirements when defining application and assign them to one or more product owners. At the same time, the engineer is also responsible for defining interoperability between applications owned by different POs. So the way we achieve this is through the onboarding process. As mentioned earlier, IP Fabric provides visibility of firewall configuration and their components, such as IPs, VRF, VLAN, and more. Using Notable SSoT, our single source of truth app, more on this later, it's possible to onboard all the necessary data from IP Fabric into Notable. This onboarding process enables the definition of the application and allows enforcement of security constraints required by regulatory policies. Once applications are defined, they can be assigned to an individual product owner. As mentioned earlier, the network engineer can then define the interoperability rules between applications. For example, consider an e-commerce web front-end application that is allowed to communicate with its backend database, but not with an HR database, for example. So these kind of policies can be clearly enforced through the defined application relationship. So this screenshot illustrates the Notable SSoT integration for IP Fabric, where the data extracted from IP Fabric, shown on the left side of the table mapping, is mapped and written into the corresponding fields in Notable on the right side of the same table. Let's review once more the previous workflow to better appreciate what comes next. Again, note that there are no automation steps involved. So now let's see every step of this new workflow that we are proposing. First step remains the same. Product owner needs to connect to application. This time, however, the PO interacts directly with Notable, and like we mentioned, using meaningful text string instead of IP addresses to model the required connectivity between applications. Thanks to IP to application mapping, Notable translates the application names into their corresponding IPs. Once that's done, Notable passes those IPs to IP Fabric, which then discovers the firewalls along the path between the two applications. IP Fabric builds the list of firewalls, on which Notable then generates the required configuration. An important note here, Notable is completely vendor agnostic, so if multiple firewall vendors are identified along the path, Notable will generate the appropriate configuration for each of them. Once the configurations are created, they are pushed to the device controller or to the device itself. As the final step, IP Fabric takes a new snapshot of the network and runs a post check to verify success. As you can see, this workflow is heavily, if not fully, automated, freeing the engineer from time-consuming operational tasks. We understand, though, that in certain situations, a manual review of the new intended firewall rules may still be necessary. So since Notable is API-centric, it can be easily integrated with ITSM application, as represented here by the purple squares. Before making changes to a firewall, Notable can generate a ticket containing the necessary details for an engineer to review and approve the change request. Once approved, the workflow can continue automatically via webhooks, completing the process as described in the previous slides. Now, since Notable supports cloud provider modeling, as well as IP Fabric can discover application paths both on premises and in the cloud, the proposed workflow are fully capable of supporting hybrid infrastructure. So let's dive into the components that make up this workflow. So the first layer that we look at is the abstraction layer, which is handled by Notable Application Dictionary. This is the Notable application view, where all applications are defined and assigned to a specific owner. As you can see on the right side, there are 4 applications belonging to the 3 different owners. If we assume I am part of the network team, for example, and these applications are allowed to be interoperable, I can raise requests involving applications that are not directly under my ownership. Here you can see the view where application dependencies are defined. As a product owner, I interact only with this form, where I can easily model the connectivity between applications. I don't need to know anything about IP addresses or firewall. I get clear overview of my application dependencies and can manage them with just few clicks. In the application service view, I can see application to IP mapping. By leveraging Nautobot IP and DCI component, I can define which server an application is running on, as well as the connected subnet or IP addresses. By also specifying the application port and protocol, the full tuple is completed, provided the necessary data to eventually convert application dependencies into a firewall policy. More on that shortly. So we conclude the application dictionary section by looking at the application details view, where all relevant information are listed, such as components, services, inbound and bound dependencies. The second and last notable layer of this solution is the firewall model hub. Let's take another look at the previous slide where application dependencies are defined with application dictionary to better understand the mapping between the application and the policies. And now let's see how Nautobot is able to translate the abstracted application dependencies as defined in the previous slide into vendor-agnostic policy rule, including unnecessary objects such as address group and service groups. So enough of theory, let's move to the demo. So on page of Nautobot, we go in application dictionary section and we look our test app 2, where it has two services, SSH and web. So the first check to show the API integration between Nautobot IP Fabric, we run just a dry run. So we are going to ask IP Fabric if the rules for those applications are already configured in whatever firewall are needed to. So IP Fabric, you will return the firewall name and also the response saying that those applications are denied along the path.
And so what you're seeing here is IP Fabric UI basically doing the same check. So showing the path lookup process here. You can be as specific as you like in terms of the layer 4 information. And once we submit that, we're able to then show you, here we go, that path is blocked at 2 firewalls. Here's the security policy that's blocking the first one. And then we go to the second one, we're able to show that as well. Now, of course, if you were doing this by hand, you'd often find that when you'd get to the first firewall and need to fix the first one. Because we're showing the whole path, you can see the multiple points of policy that need to be changed.
And here we are going to show the same on the controller of our panorama. So there are no policies defined for the application defined in the application dictionary. As a second step, since those applications have been defined, but they're not converted yet in the policy, we are going to show that there are no policies in Nautobot defined for those applications. So what we are going to do now, we are going to basically rerun the same job as we did before, but this time we go in write mode. So we are asking Nautobot to create the policies needed in order to allow those two applications. So again, through an API, IP Fabric responds with the list of devices. And then since we see they are denied, like we see before, we are going to create those rules. And from that, we can see that also the policies in Nautobot are created. So from the definition of the application in application dictionary, there's a conversion into vendor network policies in the firewall app. Now, through an integration that Nautobot has between itself and the Panorama controller, we are going to write these policies. So we are going to, through the API, we are going to connect to a Panorama controller, and we are going to push our configuration. As you're going to see now in the controller, the rules have been created. Here we are. So going back to Autobot, we are gonna commit the changes because that's a necessary step required by this type of firewall we have been using during our demo. So again, through the integration, the SSoT integration that we have with this controller, we are gonna write the changes. And then we move in the post check where we ask IP Fabric to tell us if the configuration was successful or not, triggering a request through API to take a new snapshot of the network.
And there you can see, as we go back into IP Fabric's UI, there's the snapshot started there, and it's progressing through, pulled the information about those two firewalls again, so the updated configurations are now being inserted into IP Fabric's model. And when that completes, we're then able to go ahead and run those checks again. So there's the snapshot. And as we go to the path lookup, we can see, to catch up. Okay, here you can see there from the data we've captured that the rules have been deployed, and IP Fabric has pulled that information from the devices.
Yeah, just to reiterate, now we are going to rerun the same job, and this time what we are going to see that there are no rules that deny our flows. As you can see here, the 3 applications are allowed, and there are 0 deny rules found.
And now we'll look at that in IP Fabric. Here's our path lookup that we ran before with the 3 ports. And when we submit that, our firewalls are now green. So our security policy is now allowing that traffic to flow. And you can see towards the bottom here, those policies are deployed on the left-hand firewall and on the right one. And as we go through, we can click through those and just show what those look like. There you go. There's the firewall policy, the yellow indicating that that's the policy that's been enumerated and is passing traffic. And then we go just to complete the picture that all 3 rules have been deployed. So you can see the 2 tools, they're working together in harmony. It's a really cool example of the automation ecosystem providing new ways of operating your network. And it's something that we at IP Fabric and at Network to Code have been continue to be committed to going forward. Yeah, so some examples of the things that we're looking at the moment, enhancing telemetry by not just looking at data that comes from individual data points and devices, but also using deeper network understanding to ensure that relevance of that data is understood, and enriching ServiceNow workflows with operational data without having to go gather it manually and cut and paste it into tickets, those sorts of things. Just watch this space because there are going to be definitely going to be more webinars to follow this one.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Federico and Darren. And let's open this up for some Q&A. I know earlier we went through a poll. I appreciate those who uh, decided to answer and participate in that poll. If we want to bring up those results, we certainly can here now. It looked like everyone was kind of all across the spectrum, so to speak, where we saw an even balance of people who were using general automation tools for a variety of use cases. People that had homegrown approaches to automation that they maybe inherited or built themselves, or those that are still planning and deciding on automation tools that they want to implement within their organization and their teams. So a
I,
mixed bag for sure,
I
and a
guess
great.
sorry, Taylor, I didn't mean to jump all over you there, but I guess what the beauty of these range of answers here is that everyone is at different stages of their automation journey, clearly, but a use case like we've just shown here works for all of these different people, right? You can have pre-canned approaches, you can integrate these into your existing automation approaches, lots of different options here based on where you are in that automation journey, I
Mhm.
guess.
So thank you so much for everyone participating in the poll. There was also a healthy amount of people that posed questions in the Q&A, and so let's just unpack a few of those here real quick. I see, I think the first one would be for you, Darren. It
Sure.
was, is it possible to see the firewall rule hit counters within IP Fabric?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't gather live data directly from network devices. That comes from your monitoring tooling and so on. But what we are able to do, as we've seen, is evaluate and enumerate the security policies once they're deployed. So the short answer is no, we don't. The longer answer is we have alternative ways of showing which rules are useful and necessary in your deployment. So thanks for the question.
I see that there's another question. This one's going to be Nautobot specific, so I'd be happy to field this. The question was, does Nautobot make sure that there are no duplication of rules? I'm going to say specifically firewall rules in this case. And the answer is yes. When you pair the application dictionary and the Nautobot firewall model application together, you're able to uh, have that rule duplication, that data validation engine that we have in the platform as well, ensure that there are not going to be anything that's overlapping each other in a harmful way for you. I see there's also another question. We'd be happy to answer this. Can this solution be integrated with any ITSM or just ServiceNow? Fantastic question. Thanks for asking. The answer is any ITSM could be integrated with this solution. So going back to Federico's earlier point in the webinar, this is a vendor agnostic solution. Whether you're using ServiceNow or Jira or another specialized ticketing system, we can integrate with those tools successfully. Let's see, what else do we have here? Is it possible to index my policy rule? Within Nautobot, you can certainly apply an index and a weight to your policies and your rules. So that's a function and a feature of the platform as well. If there's anything specific, Darren, that you'd want to bring up from the IP Fabric side, I'd be happy to open the floor to you.
Um, not specifically on that topic, but I noticed there's a couple of other questions here as well about will IP Fabric apply security zones and routing and NAT to the simulation of the path there? Yes, in short, is the answer to that. We will take any of those that policy that's deployed, whether that's load balancing or PBR or all of those things into account as part of the modeling. And I noticed as well, there's another question about taking that a little further, talking about URL lists and application awareness. I know that the firewall model in Autobot is very sophisticated, and I'll leave Fed to answer that in more detail. But certainly from an IP fabric perspective, we will definitely use URL filtering rules and application rules as well. We're able to test all of those as part of the simulation through the network. So, Fed, any thoughts on the Autobot side?
Nothing to add. You guys cover already very well.
And then I'm seeing another question here. Can I see the impact of the change on the target device before it is implemented? Federico, would you want to field that question for us?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Just drop a second the audio for me.
Yeah. Can I see the impact of the change on the target device before it is implemented, before the change is implemented?
Sure. So if you remember, one of the two workflow we propose as a manual review process, right? So Nautobot can, instead to go directly to the device of the controller, it can integrate with ITSM and raise a ticket. So you can still have a manual review and approval to oppose your workflow and continue it until the end. What you have seen is an ideal workflow that, of course, can be and has to be structured based on your need. So if, for example, the ITSM is not the place where you want to do the review, but you want to do in Nautobot itself or somewhere else, that's, of course, possible to do it.
Fantastic.
I can add something as well on that one, Taylor, if that's helpful. That from a pathing perspective, what IP Fabric's going to do is validate both the forwarding path and the security policy, so that you're able to see all of the points where that policy is enforced. So what that allows us to do is show you what the path is like, even if the policy is going to block the traffic. So essentially, it's the same thing that you're able then to say, well, actually, if I change this from a permit, so from a deny to a permit, what's going to happen is I'm going to forward traffic along that path that I've already got mapped out. So from that perspective, it's showing you what the traffic path would be if the change was made.
Awesome. And then I'm seeing other questions just trickle in now. A couple of them are checkpoint firewalls supported? Are legacy firewalls compatible with Nautobot? And I know we've iterated on this question a couple of times, but the answer is yes. So being a vendor agnostic solution, whether it's a legacy firewall or a more modern firewall solution, or even firewall manager like even a Panorama or Forti manager, these can all be integrated with this solution successfully. So great questions across the board. Let's see. Okay. I do appreciate everybody's interest in this and hosting a healthy question and answer session for us. I'm trying to just filter through if there are any questions we have not answered yet. But what we can do is after this webinar concludes, if you do have any questions that we have not answered up to this point, we can certainly sync with you individuals and be able to further deep dive on both the solution from a technical standpoint and any other questions that you may have that pertain to your specific business and use case. With that, Federico, let's move on from the question and answer and go through, I guess, a recap of things that we covered today in this webinar. So again, we kicked things off with an introduction to network code and IP fabric and explored why this partnership just makes sense. We walked through the current firewall provisioning process and how we are helping teams evolve to a more automated, intent-driven future. After that, you saw a deep dive into the Nautobot ecosystem and the IP Fabric solution during our joint demonstration. And then finally, thanks everyone for their participation in both the poll as well as the live Q&A session to help answer any questions.